Hey, what's happening everyone? Pragmatic Addict here. So I just got out of seeing, nope, not Renfield, but The Pope's Exorcist. Now, I was expecting to leave this movie and be like, Pope's Exorcist? More like The Poop's Exorcist. The Exorcist movies, man, they're just never good. But this movie was not half bad. So, here's what I'll say. This movie, I reacted to the trailer. It didn't sell me on shit. The movie was getting pretty well received, at least for what I was expecting it to get received. I was expecting this movie to have, like, the 10% rating that, like, I don't know, Pray for the Fucking Devil got. But it actually has been getting fair enough reviews. It's already almost made its budget back just from other territories alone, even before North America's box office. So, I mean, for what it's being received as, it is not doing half bad. So I said, you know what? Fuck it. I'll go see The Pope's Exorcist. And, yeah, I do have some stuff to talk about. So let's just dig right into it, guys. So here's what I'll say right off the bat. Russell Crowe, he was one of the obvious stands out of the movie. And when I say obvious, I don't mean like, yeah, obviously Russell Crowe's gonna deliver. No, I mean, sure, Gladiator, I think Unhinged is a pretty, nonsensical movie.
You know what a courtesy tap is, young man?
Just ignore him.
Sounds like this. Slight, it's friendly.
But for a movie like this, that was kind of like one of the big surprises. I was like, damn, they actually got Russell Crowe for an Exorcist movie, huh? And I will say, like, upon the reviews, yeah, people were saying, more or less, I think it's pretty fair to say he was going to be one of the better parts of the movie, and he is. Right off the bat, I kind of dug his character to a degree. So the movie starts off pretty straightforward. We see Russell Crowe entering this home, and it does kind of have that cliche opening for an exorcism film where you get just enough of who this guy is, this, Father Gabriel being played by Russell Crowe. You see enough of a backstory where you see an exorcism going on, and what I'll say is, yes, it does have that cliche setting where, like, right when the film started up, I was like, yep, it's an exorcist movie. But here's what I was pretty surprised by, and this goes for the movie as a whole. It does go in depth a lot more, and it does things a lot more original than you will be expecting out of your typical standard exorcism movie, but it still does enough to where it is your standard exorcism movie. Like, when I saw the reviews, I'm like, oh wow, a solid 60%. That's pretty high for an exorcism movie. And I gotta say, yeah, it's only 60%. This movie doesn't do anything that's gonna blow you away, but it does do things, again, different enough and more original and more surprising where, I was invested for more or less. So basically, yes, this film opens up, like I was saying, Russell Crowe shows up at this house and this guy just kind of goes up to Russell Crowe panicking in, that obvious fashion where he's like, these people's son is speaking English. He's never done that before. He doesn't know how to speak English. And Russell Crowe's, you kind of see that he's very skeptical of this. He's done this before and this isn't his first rodeo, so he's like, speaking in English, huh? That's, cause of concern, ain't it? Do they have a TV? And the dude's like, I think so. And Russell Crowe just kind of has that attitude of like, oh, true. So, that's the first thing I will say is his demeanor. Right off the bat, he seems very skeptical to a fair extent. Again, you obviously see that he's done this before, and I think it's a fair setup as far as, especially how Russell Crowe's character just is, his personality. Again, he has that kind of rebellious, blunt side where he's just gonna say it like it is. He's seen this shit before, and he's gonna go through the right stuff required to make sure, okay, yeah, I believe this. Let's get this started. And again, this character that Russell Crowe portrays, at least in the intro, it just didn't feel that cliche to me in that aspect. It does have a, more or less hit and miss cliche setup. It has that setup that you're expecting with an exorcism horror movie to jumpstart the film. But what I will say is that the sound design and the horror in here just kind of grabbed me right away where I was like, okay, obviously with an intro to an exorcism horror film, yes, you're gonna have to do something that's gonna get viewers in right away for what the film is going to eventually play into. But the score, man, it was booming. It was a gory intro. And I know that isn't, too much of a standout. Obviously, exorcism movies are going to get gory. It's about demonic possession, for God's sakes. But this intro did things different enough as far as, the horror goes, and did things well enough, I think, as far as showing and teasing Russell Crowe's character in this movie, where, again, I think that for an exorcism movie in 2023, it did just that much more enough to make it, again, that much more investing. Another interesting thing is that, and this, again, goes for just the movie as a whole, is that at times it doesn't exactly feel like a horror movie, or at least in this sequence, as far as, just getting past this intro, it doesn't really feel like it's going to be an exorcism movie. Obviously, we know that from, the trailer and everything, and obviously the title, The Pope's Exorcist. But this feels more like a dramatic, classic haunted house story more than anything, at least in the first act, which was very surprising to me, which going into the first act and saying how this does feel like more of a kind of classic haunted house ghost story brings me to a point I want to make, which is, again, very hit and miss. That's a lot of this movie, if not all of it. Is that the side where the possessed kid comes into the film, that's like one story where this family kind of gets this new house. It plays into where the intro we saw is actually the same house where these people are moving into. That was like a flashback sequence. And I thought, just as a story, that was fine. As its own movie, as a classic haunted house possession story, I think that could have been fine enough. And also with Russell Crowe's character, Father Gabriel, with how different and how surprising and invested enough I was with his character. And this film, again, like I said, it does play into drama a lot more. This is one of those films where obviously it is a religious horror. It has a lot of deeper lore. It has enough going for it where it could be, a pretty interesting universe. But here's the thing, is that as two separate films and two separate storylines, I think that they work fine enough. But as far as connecting into one movie and how they all tie in, that's where it kind of loses me and it doesn't feel like it connects quite properly. Which basically the story is that Father Gabriel, again with his attitude and his history, he has done basically, I believe it says like 100,000 or so exorcisms in his lifetime. And obviously with being the father of this church, his peers kind of don't really agree with that. He doesn't have the best reputation or the best respect. And again, just as that story, as that setup, I think it was fine. But here's the thing that really was kind of a disappointment. As far as how the kid from the other storyline actually comes into the mix where he gets possessed and everything, the actual exorcism movie begins, it's almost dumbfounding how cliche and abrupt and just quick that actually starts. There are also things that just come off very laughable. Like, for example, Russell Crowe's character, when he finds out that this exorcism is going to be his next case, shit you not, his arrival to this mansion or whatever, to this family, is him riding on this red and white moped, and it's just very dorky. I'm like, that is not exactly an intimidating, very much to take serious kind of intro. At least based off of what we've seen, based off of what we saw, I was like, oh damn, yeah, this is definitely Russell Crowe being in an exorcism movie. He's that much of a standout that you could expect. But seeing this, I'm just like, damn, Russell Crowe, I don't know if you're going to be able to go against the devil in that. But I do want to talk about specifically a pretty big plot point in this story. When Father Gabriel actually meets up with this possessed young boy, the chemistry between that and even just the direction, I was very surprised at how seriously and how focused the film was on that. Which is also, yes, a pretty mixed bag of a sequence. I think it does things pretty unexpected, and again, as far as the direction, it does things pretty focused and pretty well. This is also a pretty lengthy introduction and everything as far as these two characters' chemistry. But it also does things where, as far as the horror comes in, and as far as the exorcism and everything take place, you can definitely see where it's to the detriment, where it's like, okay, based off of the things that you have done well in this movie up to this point, this could have been a lot better, especially for being such an important scene as far as plot points go. And touching on a little bit more about like how more in-depth and bigger of a story and the lore goes into this film, what I will say is that this kind of feels like a continuation in some degree. When you're watching the film, there's definitely stuff where it has a lot of layers and a lot of background and history with both storylines where you kind of want to know more about Father Gabriel's history, about where this family kind of comes from. And for example, going into this first exorcism sequence, obviously with Russell Crowe's character Father Gabriel having to kind of be a little bit on edge, where he's kind of skeptical, where he has to kind of make sure he has the proof first before he can fully give into this thing, where the possessed kid kind of says something along the lines of, "I know your nightmares." And it goes into a unexpected kind of flashback sequence that is pretty interesting as far as, well, what's going on here. And it's basically a threat against Russell Crowe's character, where it's something that he's deeply triggered by and everything, and it's something that kind of brings him who he is as a person, where I really wanted to see more as the movie went on about that. But talking more about the horror a little bit, this is something that kind of surprised me, but in both good and bad ways. So before this sequence, there are some, going back to the storyline of this family moving into this house where it kind of feels like this classical ghost story feel. There are horror elements where in any typical standard exorcism movie, this would have been a jump scare, but there are horror segments that kind of creep in throughout the script that are very silent and very just abrupt and very just kind of, you kind of got to notice them. They're not the center of attention, and I dug that. But here's the thing is, like I was saying with this bigger plot point and this kind of, sequence as far as the introduction to this, where the story's going to go, the fact that those other aspects, those other horror aspects in the movie paid off more than, say, for example, this one. Again, that was just kind of a disappointment and a little bit of something that I was kind of concerned about as far as where the movie would, deliver more or less. But going back to the exorcism, what I also was pretty surprised by in a good way is that this exorcism that's being dealt with throughout the movie, it was actually pretty consistent. With exorcism, there are exorcism movies, there's times where it will focus on the exorcism, it'll do some horror, and then it'll give you some background of the characters and some slow time, and it does do that. But with the exorcism, whenever it comes back, which it was more or less consistent again, I will say that I had a variety enough to it where, again, this was a very mixed bag. I'm going to say that throughout the review, where with the exorcism and everything, it does things where you see it before. I don't think that there's too much new that you could do with an exorcism movie in 2023, but it took things seriously enough and it focused on certain things that it needed to well enough where you always wanted to see how it was going to deliver next. But during that off time away from the exorcisms, yes, obviously it does delve into the characters more and their lives a little bit more. And what I will say is that it does it to the point where there are times where I actually thought maybe this isn't so much an exorcism or like a horror film than it is a supernatural drama film. I mean, again, there was just so much lore and so much history and background to these different storylines and all these characters that I wouldn't say this very often, but maybe this movie would have worked better as a little bit longer. Like, if this was a solid 112 minutes, there are times where I was like, that would have been perfect. But here's also something that kind of goes against that, is that as the movie goes on, like I was saying earlier, how I kind of wanted some more backstory to certain aspects of the story. The film does give us that to the point where by the end of it, it does feel like after I left the movie, I was kind of in that middle area where part of me felt like it was okay for what the movie was. The movie, by the end runtime and for how long it was and all that happened in the movie, just as a whole, hit or miss, it was okay. But there also was that part of me that just felt like this movie was actually focused much better and more in-depth than I was expecting, where it kind of affected me because here's what happens. During the movie, there are scenes that are just throwaway. As an exorcism horror movie, it's gonna have that. There are scenes where you're just like, why do we need to see that? And what's ironic is that during those sequences, during those times, coincidentally, that was the time where I was like, I'd love to see more backstory towards this certain thing, for example. And by the end of it, I just felt like maybe if those plot points were moved up a little bit more, I would have taken it a little bit more seriously, and I would have been a little bit more invested than I, am up to this point. I would have been originally just more invested. There's that line where, again, it's a mixed bag, where it does things very well, and it does things pretty original and different than what you were expecting, but it is also cliche enough to be your next standard exorcism horror film. And yeah, in the end, guys, Pope's Exorcist was better than I was expecting and more in-depth and different at times than your typical standard exorcism movie, but it was still a mixed bag as far as how the film delivers on more or less every level. So yes, guys, those are my thoughts on the Pope's Exorcist. Again, just as someone who went in this film expecting to completely shit on this movie, expecting it to be just the dumbest pile of crap horror movie that Hollywood was gonna shit out this year, it was much better than that. Again, for an exorcism movie that has like a 60% or whatever, that's pretty shocking, and overall as a movie, it delivers to about that mark. But yes, guys, that is just my overall thoughts on the Pope's Exorcist. If you guys really like exorcism movies and you want something just a little bit different, I think it's worth seeing. But after this review, guys, my next review will be Beau is Afraid. Holy crap, I am excited for that movie. I am going to an early screening on the 18th, so later that night I should be dropping my review depending on what time I get out of that theater. So here's the thing, the screener is actually like an hour away. I am driving an hour just to see this fucking movie. It is one of my most anticipated. I'm not missing the screener for anything. And the movie is about 3 hours, and the movie starts at 7. So again, hopefully that night on the 18th I can deliver this review. If not, it will be shortly after, later on. But yes, guys, that will be my next review. Let me know what you guys thought about this video down below. What did you guys think about the review? What did you guys think about the Pope's Exorcist? Are you guys even gonna fucking see it? Let me know, guys. But as always, thank you guys so much for watching this review. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one. Have a great night, everyone.